In this video, we'll be covering how to define new routes in our application. We'll cover how to define public routes, restricted routes, and how to lazy load components for better efficiency and performance. To start, let's define a top-level public route. We've opened up Visual Studio Code and are inside of the CRA Starter Template folder. In the terminal, we've started the application using the command yarn start. Our application is now running at localhost port 3000, and we're on the sample page route. In the project, I've opened up the source, routes, and index.js file. This is where we define our top-level routes. Notice that the sample page route is defined and it renders the sample page component. Let's define a new route below the forgot password route and pass in the sample page component. This new component will be rendered at the /dashboard route. Now if we navigate to /dashboard in our application, the sample page component will render. We have successfully defined a new public route in our application. To create a restricted route, we need to change the component that we use to build the route. Currently, we're using the route component. To make this route an authenticated or restricted route, we need to use the restricted route component. The restricted route component is defined further up in the file. The restricted route component uses the route component, but first it checks to see if the auth user property is true. If the auth user property is true, it'll render the component that it is passed. If the auth user property is false, it'll redirect the user to the sign-in page. Let's save the file and allow our application to reload. Notice now that we are redirected to the login page because we have not authenticated. Let's sign in and authenticate. Now, when we visit the dashboard route, we should not be redirected. Our dashboard page is now a restricted route in our application. There is a recommended structure when creating subroutes or child routes. Let's modify the implementation of our dashboard component to allow the subroute add lead. The add lead component will be found at /dashboard/add lead. In our project, inside of the routes folder, let's create a new folder and we'll name it dashboard. Inside of dashboard, let's create another folder named leads. In leads, let's create the file addLead.js. The addLead component is an example component where a user can add leads to a list and then render the list to the page. Now that we've added a new component, addLead, let's save the file. Next, we need to make the application aware of the addLead component and when to render the component. We want addLead to be rendered as a child of the dashboard component. To do this, we're going to create a new index.js file inside of our dashboard folder. Inside of index.js, we're going to use some routing components. The components used inside of the dashboard component are the route and switch components, which are part of the React Router library. This component uses a regular expression to match the prefixed URL, and then attach the route where we want this component to be found. In this scenario, the requested URL will return /dashboard. Then the addLead component can be found at /dashboard/addLead. Let's save this file. Back in the application, let's try to visit our component at /dashboard/addLead. /add lead. Notice that it still renders the sample page component. That's because back in our top-level routes/index.js file, we are still passing in the sample page component. Let's go back to routes/index.js. At the top of the file, we need to import our new index.js file inside of the dashboards folder. Further down in the file, we can now replace our /dashboard component sample page with our dashboard component. Save the file. Our application reloads, and we now see our add lead component rendered at /dashboard/add lead. With this approach, we avoid hard-coding routing structures into our components. Back in our top-level routes/index.js file, we have changed the component to render the dashboard/index.js page. This means that /dashboard no longer renders the sample page component. If we want to render a component at /dashboard, we would need to provide a default component. To improve performance in your application, you may wish to lazy load components at specific routes. Let's modify the index.js file from our previous example to demonstrate how to lazy load routes in the project. First, we need to wrap the suspense component around our switch component. We can import suspense from React. Let's save the file. Let's navigate to our dashboard/add lead route. We still get our component, but we haven't changed the way that we're importing it, so we're not actually lazy loading the route. Next, we need to remove the component that we imported at the top of the page. Then, down on our route line, we need to change the component argument that we're passing in. Here, we're going to use the lazy function that we can import from React as well. Inside the lazy function, we're going to call import and pass in the path to our add lead component. Visual Studio Code automatically imported lazy into the file. However, you may need to add lazy to your imports. The add lead component will now not be loaded until we visit this route. Let's save the file. Our application gives us an error because we need to add a fallback page while the component loads. At the top of the file, let's import the page loader component from the Jumbo library. Then, let's pass page loader as the fallback property to suspense. Save the file. When the application reloaded, you may have noticed the page loader was rendered for a brief moment until the add lead component could be imported. We now have a more efficient application. You can learn more about lazy loading components on reactjs.org.